The air on the lonely planet was thin and cold. The wind carried the dust of broken metal and burned stone. For years, nothing alive had come to this place, only silence and the ghosts of forgotten wars. But that silence broke one night when a light fell from the sky. It was a massive ship, shining like a second sun as it tore through the clouds. Fire trailed behind it. The crash shook the ground for miles, and the dust rose like a wall around the wreck. Eli Trent saw it happen from the ridge above his small camp. He had lived alone on this world for 3 years. A scavenger, a fixer, a man who didn't ask questions anymore. He watched the burning light until it vanished behind the dunes. His mind told him to stay put. Nothing that fell from the stars ever brought good news, but something inside him said otherwise. He took his old mask, his rifle, and the small oxygen pack that had kept him alive all these years, and he started walking toward the wreck. The crash site was a graveyard of twisted metal and broken energy cores. The smell of ozone and fuel filled the air. Sparks danced in the darkness like fireflies. As Eli climbed over the wreckage, he heard a faint sound, something soft like breathing or crying. He followed it through the smoke and found a shattered cabin, its glass broken and its doors bent. Inside were 2 figures. One lay still under a fallen beam, her long silver hair spread across the floor like spilled light. Her skin was pale, almost shining, and her clothing carried the symbols of royal rank. Eli recognized them from old war reports. The other was trying to move, trying to lift the beam with weak arms covered in soft fur. Her eyes, golden and sharp like a cat's, turned toward him with suspicion and fear. He lifted his hands to show he meant no harm. "Easy," he said quietly, his voice calm and steady. "I'm here to help." The cat-eyed woman hissed weakly, but her strength failed her. Her arm dropped, and Eli quickly crouched beside the beam. It was heavy, too heavy for one man, but Eli was a human, and humans were built for endurance. He gritted his teeth and pushed, using a broken metal bar as leverage. The beam lifted enough for him to drag the fallen woman free. She was cold, breathing shallow but alive. Eli checked the oxygen levels in the wreck. The system was dying fast. He pulled out his own tank, hooked it to a mask, and placed it over the queen's mouth. She gasped once, then started breathing again. The Catwoman's eyes widened as she watched him give away his own air supply without hesitation. He handed her a small emergency canister from his belt. "Breathe slow," he told her. "You'll make it to my shelter." They didn't have time to argue. A small explosion rocked the ship again, throwing sparks across the walls. Eli lifted the queen onto his shoulder. She was lighter than he expected, almost weightless. The Catwoman tried to stand but stumbled. Eli turned and offered her his hand. "You walk or I carry you too," he said. His tone left no room for pride. She blinked at him once, then nodded and leaned on his arm. Together they left the wreck behind. Outside, the night sky was full of storm clouds glowing with electric light. Dust rose around them with every step. Eli led them through narrow canyons until they reached a hidden path that opened into a cave sealed by a metal door. He keyed in a code and the door slid open with a low hum. The inside was warm, filled with old equipment, food packs, and salvaged lights. Eli laid the queen gently on a cot made from blankets and thermal sheets. Her breathing was uneven, her pulse faint. He started a small generator and connected a healing unit from his old medical crate. The machine hissed softly as it worked, sending small waves of energy across her body. The Catwoman stood nearby, tense but silent. Her ears flicked as she watched every move he made. "Who are you?" she finally asked. Her voice was soft but carried strength even through exhaustion. "Name's Eli," he said, not looking up. "Used to be a repair tech. Now I just keep things alive when they break." She tilted her head, confused. "You saved a Seraphim queen," she said slowly. "You know what that means?" "Doesn't matter what she is," he replied. "She's hurt." "So are you." The Catwoman blinked again, uncertain how to answer. No one had ever spoken to her queen like that before. She sat near the cot, her golden eyes fixed on the human. The air was quiet except for the hum of machines. Hours passed. The storm outside grew louder, wind howling against the cave walls. Inside, the queen stirred. Her eyes opened, bright, icy blue. She looked at the ceiling, then at the man sitting beside her. "Who are you?" she asked weakly. Eli looked up from the generator and met her gaze. "Just a human," he said. "Found you in the wreck. You helped me." He nodded once. "You were dying. Couldn't just walk away." The queen tried to speak but stopped, too weak. She closed her eyes, her face softening slightly. The Catwoman whispered something in her language, words of comfort. Eli leaned back, watching them both in silence. He didn't know who they really were or what trouble they carried, but in that moment it didn't matter. They were alive. Outside, the storm raged on, lightning lighting up the sky in white flashes. Inside, under the faint hum of the machines, 3 lives hung by a thread. 1 human, 1 royal, and 1 warrior with golden eyes. None of them knew that the crash was only the beginning, and that before dawn the galaxy would start to hunt them all. The storm outside lasted all night. The wind screamed across the barren desert, shaking the metal door of the shelter. Inside, the small room glowed softly with the light of old lanterns. Eli worked quietly near the corner, repairing a broken power cell while the 2 aliens rested. The Queen was still weak but breathing steady. The Catwoman Lyra sat nearby, alert but calm, her golden eyes watching every sound and movement. Eli didn't speak much. He moved like someone used to silence, his steps quiet and his face calm. He had lived alone for so long that words had become heavy things for him. But now, with 2 strangers under his care, the air felt different. He had forgotten what it was like to share the space with others, to hear someone breathing beside him, to cook enough food for more than 1 person. When the storm finally began to fade, Eli walked over to the stove and warmed a small pot of soup. The smell of spice and smoke filled the room. Lyra's ears flicked at the scent, and she glanced toward him with curiosity. "That smell. It's strange," she said softly. "Human food," he replied, stirring the pot. "It's not much, but it'll keep you alive." Lyra hesitated. "You don't fear us?" "My queen could order your death with a word." Eli shrugged. "She's too tired to give orders right now. And I don't take them anyway." The Catwoman blinked, surprised by his answer. No one had ever spoken about the Queen with such simple honesty. She watched him pour the soup into metal bowls and place them on the table. When the Queen finally woke, her eyes were distant, full of pain and confusion. Eli handed her a bowl carefully. "You should eat," he said. "You've lost a lot of strength." The Queen looked at the food like it was a strange offering. "You give me your supplies? You risk your life for aliens you do not know?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp. Eli nodded. "If I didn't, you'd be dead already." Her expression softened, but only a little. "Humans are unpredictable," she murmured. "You are not what I expected." "I get that a lot," he said simply, and went back to fixing a broken heater. The room stayed quiet after that. Lyra helped the Queen eat slowly, holding the bowl for her when her hands trembled. The faint sound of metal and machines filled the silence. For the first time, the Queen's eyes softened, the coldness of command replaced by something fragile. When night came again, Eli checked the scanners he had set up near the cave entrance. They showed faint movement far away, small dots blinking on the radar. He frowned. "Search drones," he muttered under his breath. Lyra's ears perked. "Drones from who?" "Could be bounty hunters," he said. "Could be military. Either way, they'll find that wreck by morning." The Queen's eyes opened wide. "If they find the wreck, they will find us," she whispered. "You must leave us here, human. They will kill you for helping me." Eli turned toward her, his expression steady. "Not happening. I didn't drag you out of that fire just to leave you for someone else to finish the job." Lyra stood up. "You don't understand. The people looking for her are not kind. They will burn this planet if they think she still lives." "I've seen worse," he said. "I'll move the ship pieces tomorrow. Hide the trail. We'll keep the power low so they can't pick up heat signatures." The Queen stared at him in silence. Her mind told her this human was foolish, reckless, yet something about his calm tone made her believe him. He didn't speak like a servant or a soldier or someone seeking reward. He spoke like someone who had already faced death before and no longer feared it. Later that night, when Eli slept in his chair, Lyra leaned close to the Queen and whispered softly, "He doesn't act like others. He helped us without question. Why?" The Queen looked at the human's face in the dim light. "Perhaps he has lost something," she said quietly. "Only those who have lost much learn to save others without reason." The next morning, Eli woke early. He packed supplies and walked out toward the wreck site before the suns rose. The cold bit at his face, but he moved fast, covering footprints with sand. At the crash, he worked for hours, using tools to scatter metal and make it look like scavengers had already stripped the wreck. He covered the parts with dust and heat-blocking cloth. Then he destroyed the signal beacon completely. When he returned, Lyra was waiting near the door holding his rifle. "You're late," she said, her tail flicking nervously. "Had to make it look real," he said, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Anyone scanning will think the ship was empty." The Queen sat upright now, a bit of color returning to her face. "You risked much for us, Eli Trent. You could have escaped while you still had time." He shook his head. "Not my style." "Then what is your style?" she asked, her voice carrying a faint trace of curiosity. Eli smiled slightly. "Keeping people alive, even when they don't think they deserve it." The Queen looked away, silent for a long moment. Lyra's golden eyes softened too. The silence between them was no longer tense. It felt heavy with something different, something like respect. As the day faded, Eli powered down the lights and checked the sensors again. The dots were closer now, maybe a few hours away. The Queen saw the worry in his eyes even though he tried to hide it. "Whatever happens," Eli said quietly, loading his weapon, "we'll get through it. All of us." Lyra placed her hand on her blade and nodded. The Queen didn't speak, but her gaze lingered on him. The lone human who had chosen to fight for two strangers from the stars. Outside, the wind carried the sound of engines in the distance. The hunters were coming, and deep inside that hidden shelter, 3 lives prepared to stand together: human, alien Queen, and Catwoman, bound by a fragile thread of trust that might be the only thing strong enough to save them. The night was colder than usual. The desert wind howled across the rocks, carrying the faint hum of engines from far away. Eli stood at the edge of the canyon, watching the dark horizon through his scope. He could see lights moving, and small, distant, but growing brighter. The hunters were back, and this time they were not just searching. They were coming to kill. Behind him, the shelter was quiet. The Queen sat near the table, her silver hair falling over her shoulders, her hands wrapped around a metal cup of warm water. Lyra stood near the door, her ears twitching as she listened to the wind. Every sound made her tense. She had fought in many battles, but this was different. This time she wasn't fighting for her army or her empire. She was fighting for survival, for the man who had saved them both. Eli came inside and placed his rifle on the table. "They found our decoys," he said. "Now they'll come straight here." Lyra's tail flicked sharply. "How many?" 2 ships, maybe 15 men, Eli replied. Armed, fast and angry. The Queen looked up slowly. "We cannot fight them all." Eli gave a small nod. "Maybe not. But we can make it costly for them." He opened a metal box and spread its contents across the table. Homemade explosives, signal jammers, old grenades patched together from scrap parts, and a single plasma mine. Lyra stared at the items with wide eyes. "You made all this?" "Had to," Eli said. "When you live alone long enough, you learn to build what you can't buy." Lyra smiled faintly, though fear still shone in her eyes. "You humans really are Deathworlders." Eli glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Maybe, but right now that's a good thing." They worked through the night. Eli set traps along the narrow pass leading to the shelter. Lyra helped him bury the plasma mine near a pile of rocks where the enemy would likely take cover. The Queen, too weak to fight, helped as best she could, organizing supplies, checking scanners, and preparing the emergency transport pod in case they needed to flee. Hours passed, and dawn began to rise, painting the sand in shades of red and gold. The moment the first sun appeared, a low hum filled the air. Engines approaching fast. Lyra gripped her blade tightly. Eli crouched behind a rock and checked the safety on his rifle. "Positions," he said quietly. The ships appeared over the ridge, dark and sleek. They descended slowly, engines stirring clouds of dust. The bounty hunters spread out, moving in formation, scanning the ground. One of them, wearing silver armor, raised a communicator. Thermal signatures detected. 2 life forms. Capture the Queen alive. Kill the rest. Eli heard those words through his earpiece. His jaw tightened. He waited motionless as the hunters crept closer to the canyon entrance. When the first one stepped on the pressure plate hidden beneath the sand, Eli whispered, "Now." The explosion shook the canyon like thunder. Rocks rained down, and the first 2 hunters were thrown into the air. The others shouted in confusion, firing blindly into the dust. Lyra leapt from behind a boulder, her movements fast and graceful. She slashed through one attacker's weapon, sending sparks flying. Eli fired from cover, his shots clean and precise. The fight turned chaotic. The hunters were better armed, but Eli and Lyra knew the terrain. They used every shadow, every rock, every trick the land offered. The plasma mine detonated next, creating a burst of light and heat that echoed for miles. Inside the shelter, the Queen could only listen. Her heart pounded as she heard the distant sound of gunfire and explosions. She wanted to help, but her body was weak. She stood slowly and walked to the small window, watching the flashes of battle far away. Human courage, she whispered to herself. It burns brighter than fire. Back outside, the last of the hunters regrouped near their ship. Eli was bleeding from a cut on his arm, but he kept fighting. Lyra covered his flank, her claws slashing through another enemy's armor. They were both breathing hard, surrounded by smoke and dust. Then came the sound they didn't want to hear. The second ship landing behind them. More soldiers poured out, their weapons glowing blue. Eli cursed under his breath. Too many, he said. We have to fall back. Lyra hesitated. The Queen... She's the one they want, he interrupted. We lead them away. He threw a flare into the air and ran toward the West Canyon. The hunters followed, thinking he was trying to escape. Lyra ran beside him, panting, her tail flicking wildly. Blasts of energy scorched the sand around them. One bolt hit close, throwing Eli to the ground. Lyra turned, roaring with fury, and dragged him behind a rock. You're hurt, she said, her voice shaking. I've been worse, he replied, forcing himself up. Keep moving. They ran deeper into the canyon until the sound of engines faded behind them. For a moment, only the wind remained. Eli dropped to one knee, breathing hard. Lyra looked at him, her chest rising and falling. Why do you do this? She asked softly. You could have run away. Saved yourself. Eli looked at her and smiled faintly. Because someone once did the same for me. She didn't ask more. The meaning in his eyes was enough. When they finally returned to the shelter at dusk, the Queen was waiting at the door. Her face was pale, but her eyes shone with relief. You both came back, she said softly. Eli nodded. Barely. Lyra collapsed near the wall, exhausted. The Queen moved closer, her gaze lingering on the human. You fought for me when for someone you owe nothing to. Why? Eli looked down for a moment, then met her eyes. Maybe because everyone deserves one chance to be saved. The Queen was silent, but something in her heart changed that moment. For years she had ruled through fear and strength. But this one human, living alone in the dust, had shown her something stronger. Quiet mercy. Outside, the battlefield burned in the distance. Smoke rose into the red sky. The fight wasn't over, but for that night they had survived. Inside the small shelter, under the hum of dying machines, the Queen, the Catwoman, and the human sat together. 3 souls from different worlds, bound by the same fragile thread of hope. The fire in the small heater burned low, casting a soft glow across the walls of the shelter. Outside, the sky was turning gray again. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and dust from the battle that had taken place the day before. Eli sat near the table, cleaning his rifle in silence. His arm was bandaged, his movements slow but steady. Lyra sat on the floor beside him, sharpening her claws on a strip of metal. The Queen was awake now, sitting upright on her cot. She looked stronger than before, but her eyes carried deep thought. No one spoke for a long time. The silence felt heavy but peaceful in its own way. It was the kind of silence that came after surviving something impossible. Finally, the Queen broke it. You could have left us, she said softly. You could have run while the ships attacked. Why didn't you? Eli glanced at her, his face calm as always. I don't run from people who need help, he said. The Queen tilted her head slightly. Even if it means your death? He nodded. Especially then. Lyra looked up from her work, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. You humans are strange. You fight like wild beasts, but you protect like family. Eli smiled faintly. Maybe we just don't know the difference anymore. For the first time, the Queen smiled too, a small, rare smile that carried warmth instead of pride. It was the first real smile she had given since the crash. Later, as Eli checked the radar, he noticed something new. A signal, faint but familiar. It wasn't from the hunters this time. It came from deep space, far beyond the local system. Someone's broadcasting a rescue code, he said, eyes fixed on the screen. The Queen stood quickly. A rescue signal? From my fleet? Looks like it, Eli said. Encrypted in your people's pattern. They're coming. Lyra's ears twitched. How far? Maybe 2 days, Eli replied. But the hunters will pick it up too. The Queen's relief turned to worry. Then they will come faster. If they find us before my fleet arrives, we will not survive another fight. Eli leaned back in his chair, thinking. Then we make sure they find something else instead. He began preparing again, setting traps, disguising heat trails, hiding supplies underground. Lyra helped him dig shallow pits for the equipment, while the Queen adjusted the transmitter, sending false signals across the desert to confuse the scanners. For hours they worked side by side, the three of them moving with quiet focus. When the suns began to set, the world around them turned a deep orange. The wind carried a soft hum through the canyon. Eli stood on the ridge and watched the horizon. He could almost see the faint glimmer of ships far away, like stars that refused to fade. Lyra joined him, wiping dust from her face. You think they'll really come for her? He nodded slowly. She's a queen. Her people won't stop looking. Lyra looked at him for a long time. And what about you? When they come, what will you do? Eli smiled faintly. Guess I'll go back to fixing things. That's what I do. She tilted her head, her ears lowering slightly. You could come with us. The Queen would reward you. You'd have a home, a purpose again. He shook his head. Home's not a place. It's a choice. I already made mine. Lyra didn't answer. She just looked at him, her eyes soft with something like sadness. That night, the Queen called for Eli. She was sitting by the old table, her silver eyes reflecting the lantern light. I owe you something, human, she said quietly. A life debt. You saved me when my own people could not. You could ask anything, gold, land, even command in my fleet. Eli looked down for a moment, then met her gaze. I don't need anything from you, he said. Just a promise. She frowned slightly. A promise, he nodded. Promise that when you go back, you remember this. Not all humans are monsters. Some of us still care. The Queen was silent for a long time. Her eyes softened. I promise, she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. And I will keep it. Before dawn, the storm came again, strong winds shaking the shelter. Eli woke first, checking the radar. The signal from the Queen's fleet was stronger now, but another one appeared nearby. The hunters were back, closer than before. They're here, he said sharply. Lyra jumped up, grabbing her blade. The Queen stood, steadying herself on the wall. Eli looked at them both. No fighting this time, he said. We're running. The fleet's almost here. They left the shelter just as the first light broke over the desert. The wind whipped around them, carrying the sound of engines behind. The hunters' ships were cutting through the storm, their lights flashing through the dust. Eli led the way through the narrow canyon, his rifle slung over his back. Just keep moving, he said. We reach the ridge and they'll lose radar lock. Lyra covered the rear, her movements sharp and fast. The Queen stumbled once, and Eli caught her arm, pulling her forward. Almost there, he said, his voice steady even as the ground shook under their feet. Then, out of the clouds, a new sound filled the air, deep, powerful, like thunder rolling through the heavens. The Queen looked up and gasped. That's them, she said. My fleet. Huge ships broke through the clouds, their dark shapes shining against the light. The hunters stopped firing. The sky filled with beams of energy as the Seraphim fleet descended. The hunters scattered, their ships retreating into the distance. Eli, Lyra, and the Queen stood together on the ridge, watching the massive vessels hover above the desert. The Queen's eyes filled with tears, not of fear but relief. We are saved, she whispered. Eli smiled faintly, lowering his weapon. Told you we'd make it. Lyra turned to him, her tail flicking softly. You really are impossible, she said. He chuckled quietly. Yeah, that's the human way. As the fleet's landing lights shone across the sand, the three of them stood together one last time. A queen reborn, a warrior redeemed, and a human who had reminded them both what courage truly meant. The wind moved gently through the canyon, carrying away the last traces of battle. For a moment, everything was calm. But deep in their hearts, they all knew. What had begun as an act of mercy had become something far greater, a bond that would never be broken. The sky above the desert shimmered with silver light as the Seraphim fleet hung low in the clouds. Giant ships moved with grace, their engines humming softly like a deep song. Eli stood at the ridge with dust on his boots and blood drying on his sleeve. He had seen many ships in his life, but none so beautiful or powerful. For a moment he felt small beneath their glow, a lone human on a forgotten world, staring at the might of an empire he didn't belong to. Beside him, the Queen stood tall again. The wind lifted her silver hair, and her royal aura seemed to return with every breath she took. Her eyes, though calm, carried something new, a quiet warmth she had never shown before. Lyra stood just behind them, her golden eyes scanning the horizon for danger even now. As the fleet's rescue lights shone brighter, the first dropships began to descend, their wings unfolding like silver petals. Soldiers stepped out, armored in royal blue and black. They moved quickly, securing the area. When the Queen stepped forward, they dropped to their knees. "Your Majesty," one of them said, his voice trembling through the comms. "We thought you were gone." "I almost was," the Queen said softly. "But someone found me." She turned her gaze toward Eli. The soldiers followed her eyes and looked at the human. For a moment there was silence. Then, as if remembering protocol, they raised their weapons. "Step back, human," one barked. "You will not approach the Queen." Eli raised his hand slowly, his voice calm. "Easy, soldier. I'm not here to cause trouble." Lyra stepped forward, her fur bristling. "He's the reason the Queen is alive. Lower your weapons." The lead officer hesitated, looking between Lyra and Eli. "He's human," the soldier said sharply. "A scavenger from a death world. They are dangerous." The Queen's voice cut through the tension like cold steel. "Enough," she said. "If this human had not risked his life, none of us would be standing here. You will lower your weapons." The soldiers obeyed immediately, bowing their heads. Eli let out a small breath and gave her a nod of thanks. "Appreciate that," he said quietly. Medical officers came forward, tending to the Queen and Lyra. One tried to approach Eli, but he waved him off. "Save your supplies." "I'm fine," he said. The Queen turned to him. "You are hurt." "Nothing I can't handle," he replied with a small grin. "Been worse." For a while the desert was filled with the sound of engines and the rush of soldiers moving supplies. The Queen watched them, her expression thoughtful. She had everything again, her army, her ships, her throne. Yet part of her felt something strange, a pull toward the human who had given her kindness when she had nothing. When the preparations were finished, a sleek shuttle descended near them. Its doors opened, revealing a grand interior lined with silver and crystal. The commander approached the Queen and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, your personal transport is ready. We can leave at once." The Queen nodded slowly. Then she turned to Eli. "You will come with us," she said. "You have earned that right." Eli looked at the shining shuttle, then back at the desert that had been his home for years. He shook his head slightly. "No, Your Majesty. This place may be empty, but it's mine. I don't belong up there." The Queen frowned softly. "You saved a queen and her guard. You fought alone against an army. You belong wherever you choose." Eli smiled faintly. "That's kind of you. But I think I'll stick to fixing engines and watching sunsets. You've got a kingdom to rebuild." Lyra stepped closer, her golden eyes bright with emotion. "You could come with us, Eli," she said softly. "We could use someone like you. Someone who doesn't give up." He chuckled quietly. "If I came with you, who'd fix this place when it breaks again?" The Queen's expression softened. "Then let me at least repay you." Eli shook his head. "You already have. You reminded me what it means to care again." The Queen fell silent, her eyes glimmering in the light. For a moment she seemed lost for words. Lyra looked between them, sensing something deep unspoken. As the wind swept through the canyon, the Queen finally took off a small pendant from around her neck, a piece of glowing crystal carved with royal markings. She pressed it into Eli's palm. "This carries the Seraphim royal code," she said. "If you ever need help anywhere in the stars, show this. It will open every door." Eli looked at the pendant for a long moment. It was heavy, not from weight but from meaning. "I'll keep it safe," he said quietly. Lyra stepped forward next, holding a small silver shard, a fragment of her blade. "A token," she said. "So you remember us," he smiled. "As if I could forget." The Queen gave one last look around the desert, the place where she had nearly died and where she had found something greater than power. Then she turned toward her ship. "Come," she said to Lyra. "It's time." As they walked toward the shuttle, Lyra turned one last time and waved at Eli. He lifted his hand in return, his expression calm, but his eyes full of quiet emotion. The engines roared and the shuttle began to rise, kicking up a storm of dust around him. He watched as it climbed higher and higher, until it vanished into the clouds, leaving only the echo of its engines behind. When the desert finally fell silent again, Eli stood alone, the wind brushing against his face. He looked at the sky, where a faint trail of light marked the path of the fleet disappearing into the stars. He opened his hand and stared at the pendant glowing softly in his palm. For a long time he stood there in the stillness, listening to the wind. Then he turned back toward his shelter, the same place where it had all begun. There was work to do and life to live. But somewhere out there, across the endless stars, two souls would remember the human who had stood between life and death. Not for glory, not for power, but because it was simply the right thing to do. And as the suns began to rise again over the quiet world, Eli Trent smiled, knowing that even in the vastness of space, a single act of kindness could change everything. Weeks passed since the Queen's fleet had vanished into the sky. The desert returned to silence once more, broken only by the sound of wind and the soft hum of Eli's machines. The crash site was now just a scar on the land, twisted metal half buried in sand, scorched rocks, and faded footprints. But Eli didn't mind the quiet. He had always lived this way, alone with his thoughts and the sound of the wind. Yet somehow, the silence felt different now. He sat outside his shelter one evening staring at the two suns sinking below the dunes. The sky was painted in gold and violet. He had patched the roof, cleaned his tools, and fixed his broken generator. But his mind wasn't on his work. His thoughts drifted to the Queen and Lyra, two lives that had come crashing into his lonely world and left behind something he could never explain. He still carried the pendant the Queen had given him. Sometimes, when the nights grew long and cold, he would take it out and hold it up to the starlight. The crystal glowed softly, pulsing like a heartbeat. It wasn't just a gift, it was a reminder that even a simple man could matter in a galaxy full of giants. A sandstorm rose that night. The wind howled against the shelter, shaking the door. Eli secured everything and sat by the heater, reading through an old journal he had kept. He wrote down what had happened, every detail of the crash, the rescue, and the final goodbye. He wasn't much of a writer, but he wanted the story to live somewhere beyond his memory. When the storm passed the next morning, the air was clear again. The desert stretched endlessly under the bright light. Eli climbed the ridge to check his solar panels, but something caught his eye. Far in the distance, a small object glimmered against the sand, moving, flashing in short bursts of light. It wasn't natural. It was a beacon. He frowned, adjusting his scope. The signal blinked in a pattern he recognized instantly. Seraphim code. His heart jumped. He hurried back to the shelter, activated the scanner, and locked onto the signal. It was faint but steady. A message was being transmitted, repeating again and again in the same calm voice. This is Queen Seraphim of the Royal Fleet. To the human known as Eli Trent. Your name has reached the stars. He froze, staring at the screen as the message continued. Your actions are known across 10 worlds. The Council has declared you a protector of the Seraphim. You are to be honored for your courage and mercy. We have sent a small transport to deliver this message personally. It carries something that belongs to you. Eli sat back in his chair, speechless. The machine beeped softly as the signal faded. He ran a hand through his hair and laughed quietly to himself. Well, he muttered, that's new. Hours later, the sky lit up once again. A small ship descended through the clouds. Not one of the giant war vessels, but a sleek silver transport. It landed gently on the sand near his shelter. The ramp opened, and a familiar figure stepped out. It was Lyra. She looked the same, tall, graceful, her golden eyes bright against the sunlight. Her armor was cleaner now, marked with royal insignia, but her smile was still warm and real. You didn't think we'd forget you, did you? She said. Eli grinned. I figured you had bigger problems than an old scavenger. Lyra shook her head. You're no scavenger, Eli Trent. You're a friend of the throne. She held out a small metal case and placed it on the table beside him. When he opened it, he found a silver emblem inside, shaped like a star with the Seraphim crest at its center. The Queen asked me to bring this, Lyra said. It's a royal insignia and proof that you're one of us now. Wherever you go in the galaxy, this will protect you. Eli looked at the emblem, then back at her. I'm honored, he said quietly. But I'm just a man who did what anyone should do. Lyra smiled gently. No, Eli. Most wouldn't have done what you did. You gave the Queen something no one else could, faith in another species. They stood together in the quiet desert wind. For a moment, there were no titles, no worlds, no empires, just two people who had shared something no one else could understand. Lyra looked up at the twin suns. "The Queen wanted to come herself," she said softly, "but the Council wouldn't allow it. She's rebuilding her empire, but she speaks of you often. She said if you ever call for her, she will come." Eli smiled faintly, watching the sunlight dance across the sand. "Tell her I'm still fixing things down here," he said, "and that I'll keep the stars in mind." Lyra laughed quietly. "I'll tell her that." Before she left, she handed him a new communicator, sleek, silver, and marked with the same royal crest. "If you ever need us, press this," she said, "and we'll find you." He took it gently and nodded. "Thank you, Lyra, for everything." She gave a small bow, her tail flicking lightly in the wind. "No, Eli, thank you." Then she stepped back into the ship and the ramp closed behind her. The engines roared, lifting the craft into the sky. Eli watched until it disappeared among the stars. Then he turned back toward his shelter, the emblem shining in his hand. He placed it beside the Queen's pendant on the table, two small symbols that carried the weight of a friendship that had crossed worlds. That night he sat by the fire, staring at the endless stars above. Somewhere out there the Queen was alive and ruling again. Somewhere Lyra was protecting her, loyal as always. And here he was, a human on a lonely planet, yet somehow part of something greater. He smiled softly, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "Guess we all got saved," he whispered to himself. The wind carried his words into the night and the stars seemed to listen. In the quiet of the desert, Eli Trent closed his eyes, knowing that even the smallest act of kindness could echo through the universe, and that somewhere, among distant stars, two hearts still remembered the human who had saved them when their lives hung by a thread.